Hello YouTube, thank you for watching my video on tips and advanced workflow of Trello. Before I begin, let me just preface by saying that I believe that anything can be organized on Trello. It's all in accordance with how well you understand organization. I've tried all the platforms: Monday, Jira, Asana, Zoho, all of them. I'm surprised every time another one pops up. It's like, can something original be created? But Trello, in my mind, is the most user-friendly, and if you learn some of how it works, and some of its power-ups, you're basically able to accomplish just about anything. First, I'm going to begin by showing you some very useful tips, and then we'll get into more of the advanced stuff. So, some of the most frequently asked questions: if you're in a board, you have a lot of lists, and creating a new list requires you to scroll to the right and then drag to the left. If this is your dilemma and you'd like to know how to create a list on the left side, the answer to that is that you have to double click on the screen. So if I double click here and I insert, and you give your list a name, it'll pop up right here. If I do it over here, it'll pop up right here. So that's a quick way to get the list in the desired location without having to scroll, click, drag. Number two, if there are a lot of cards, right, and the cards can get very long and extensive, and you want to create a new one, but then you have to, you're used to doing this, and then you drag it to the top. But what happens if it's really, really long, the list? You don't want to do that. So the way to solve that is by hovering over a card and pressing the letter N on your keyboard, N as in Nancy. If you press the letter N while you're hovering over a card, it'll allow you to insert a card beneath the card that you are hovering over. If you want one under 7, you press N and you insert the card. Very useful. Number 3, if you want to assign yourself to the card, you hover over the card and press the space bar. That will automatically assign you and or unassign you without having to go to members, which is often found in here. You could avoid 3 or 4 clicks by just space, and you could also unassign yourself. Very useful. If you want to add another member other than yourself without having to click in and then click on members, you press the letter A, and you'll have your members list right here. Learning keyboard shortcuts is the key to proficient workflow. If you're the guy that sits behind the computer, the guy or the gal who sits behind the computer for hours every day doing this kind of project management, it's important to learn keyboard shortcuts. It saves overall hours and hours of work. So we have the letter A for member, as well as M. M as in Mary. A and M seem to trigger the same thing. Now, a couple things regarding text. There are a couple tricks for writing bold text, italic, or crossed out text, or even linking text. Linking text is very important, especially if you're linking between cards. Let me show you some examples. I star star the word star star the word. If you put star star before and after a word, it will turn it into bold. So you have I love you, the word love is in bold, because of the stars. Anytime you want to have anything bold, you put stars in front or after. If you want italic, put underscores. Or you put 1 star. Italic. If you want crossed out, you do this symbol. I don't even know what it's called. And you cross out a word or a sentence or a paragraph. And then the most important is links. Linking, you would put the text in brackets, link, and without any space, parentheses, you would actually put the link. Okay, so let me show you why. Let's say I want to link, let's give you some case examples, services. Okay. Here you have a list services, here you have a list customers. Customer 1 has its own URL. You could always get the URL by copying it over here, or probably copying it from up here. If you have under services the list of customers that are using this services, for example, you may do something like this. Bracket, customer 1, bracket, parentheses, the URL, and save. Now you have customer 1 is actually linked to the customer. And then you're in this customer just like that. So social media, you may have something organized like this. Social media includes A, B, C. So say you're describing what social media includes. Then you might want to write current clients using this service. And then you have a list of clients. Customer 1. Customer 2. And you would do the same thing here. You would get the URL. Control-C. The reason you want to learn how to link cards and boards together is for the smoothness of the workflow. Less clicking, less is more. In general, less is more. For someone who sits behind the computer all the time and you're jumping between boards and cards and lists, you want them all to work together. Another thing you might do is you might copy this card and you may want to attach it here. Attachment, attachment link, attach. That's another way. So when you're in social media learning about what this service is, and then you could easily click on the clients that are using this services to learn about the client, you could easily come back to where you came from, services. The amount of clicks that you save by doing this, and this is potentially from one board to the next. So imagine how many times you'd have to click around to get to the next board, which reminds me, by the way, I'm sure you know this, but you would have your list of boards here on the side, and you could keep this. I always keep this menu open because I have probably 100 boards. So you always want to keep this left side menu open. It shifts everything over to the right. For right now, I'll close it because this is a demo and I don't have it open. So attaching, you could attach a Trello card, which links you to it. So here we're jumping in circles from here to there. And you could connect a bunch of lists, a bunch of cards, a bunch of boards, and turn it into something that is more alive, something that is more intuitive. It's almost like building a web app where you're going from one place to the next and accomplishing one thing after the next without the manual, without the legwork. And that reminds me also, notice this, that if you put a hashtag in front of something, it becomes a header. It becomes bold and big, like a header. So these are just formatting, text formatting that could also be helpful. Alright, so that basically summarizes some of the most important tips. Learning how to attach things. You could also drag and drop URLs directly here and turn it into attachment. By going to attachment and attaching a link. So you could put any link here. It could be to a Google Doc. This makes it alive. Now let's get more into the advanced user. So I used to work in a dealership where we sold used vans. So imagine a dealership. And in case you don't know, the industry for buying and selling used cars, automobile, is very dynamic. There are potentially between 100 and 200 steps that any vehicle has to go through from, I guess you could say, from conception until when it's completely sold and all the paperwork is done. I mean, there's just an extensive amount of steps that the vehicle has to go through. Say it gets purchased in the auction, from getting the title, to getting the vehicle, to checking the vehicle, inspecting the vehicle, fixing the vehicle, cleaning the vehicle. I mean, the list is just endless. I worked in a place, and I had it down to a science. I'm telling you, it went through more than 100 steps. It doesn't matter if it's a $5,000 used vehicle, if it's a legit dealership, the amount of steps that each vehicle has to go through in order for it to process from purchasing it to selling it is very extensive. Now, to build a software where you automate or you keep track or you manage all of this would cost a couple $100,000. And a small dealership may not have the money for that. My point is Trello. Trello can often solve workflow that hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of software would otherwise have to solve. And if you don't have the budget for it, all you need is someone with a creative mind, with organizational skills, that could organize a Trello board or a similar platform to Trello to solve these types of workflow processes. Let me show you an example. So here's the actual Trello board that I created for that dealership. I recovered it in my archived boards. By the way, if you ever archive, in other words, delete or get rid of a board, you can recover it. You just go here and you go to see closed boards. If it was a team board, it will be closed and archived and it'll turn into a personal board, but you could still recover it. So if I go in over here, I named it Vehicles and Sales Flow. I didn't want to attempt to build an example because this took weeks or months to really perfect. so I figured I'll show you on the real deal. I created lists: incoming, on lot, pending sale, ready for paperwork, that's post-sale. If he made the sale, if the salesperson made the sale, it's ready for paperwork. This is sold, finished paperwork, then filed. And then there's some miscellaneous. Dead deals, deals that either something happened with the vehicle or halfway in something got stale. And then there's some vehicles that we would purchase for parts. But for the most part, we were dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lists. We're managing the entire backend. And the way that I had conceptualized it was that if you know dealerships, the way they work, for example, they have an envelope. And all the title and all the paperwork goes into this envelope. And they try to keep meticulous record of this envelope. So from a modern and evolved perspective, technology-wise, it's a little bit archaic. I mean, you're relying on humans, you're relying on papers, physical paper. It was just a mess that didn't make sense to me as a technology person. So I had conceptualized it completely different. I had seen the envelope as something that should really be virtual and something that should have concise reconciliation. So I turned that concept of the physical envelope into a virtual envelope. And this is what each card became, a virtual envelope. Really, an envelope or each card just refers to a vehicle. But what is the vehicle as far as the dealership is concerned? The vehicle is just this idea. It's a collection of papers, potentially money, signatures, because you're not holding on to the vehicle, so it's not really the vehicle itself. It's just a collection of things. And throughout the process of when you purchase the thing until when you get rid of it, the collection of things changes. And this is what each card represents. I had created a vehicle template using one card, and I call it vehicle template. In the vehicle template, I had put description with a couple 5 or 6 initial questions. New York or out-of-state deal, commercial or personal deal, commercial or personal plates. Are we issuing, transfer or ITP? Is it a cash or finance deal? Is the actual deal mileage in the system that they were using? The reason these questions were here was already set up for further down the pipeline. It was already set up for the salesperson. Why? Because when the salesperson makes the deal and fills this in, if the salesperson were to take this vehicle as it's in a deal and fill in those questions, then the person who is going to do the paperwork, who is going to process all these upcoming steps, would already have answers to everything that they could possibly need answers on in order to make the deal. So again, we're using one card to define all kinds of conditions, and the way that I did it was as follows. I used the description for some of those questions. Then I created checklists, and I created a lot of checklists. I basically created a checklist for every possible deal scenario. Why? Because again, reconciliation. You should not be running the back end of a company with ifs or maybes. There has to be clear and concise reconciliation. If every vehicle, as you can see over here, 133 items on these checklists. Now granted, not every deal gets every checklist, but it still comes out to over 100, and this doesn't even include what goes on in the shop when the vehicle actually enters the shop. That would require a whole nother board. This is just from the sales and admin standpoint. If every vehicle goes through 100 steps, from when it is bought until when it is sold and filed away, then you can't leave that up to memory. And this is how dealerships work. Again, my point here is not dealership. You need to take what I'm explaining and apply it to your backend, your workflow, your project management. I'm giving this as an example because I am in project management. I manage development and marketing projects. They don't come close to this level of complexity. Not even close. Dealerships and services that offer those kinds of dynamic transactions where the product or the service goes through a million steps, those are far more complex than project management. And I'm trying to go to the epitome. I'm trying to show the top here. I'm trying to point out how Trello or similar technology, project management tools, can solve the most complex workflows. Of course, you need a business owner who is willing. You know, a lot of old school people, they're just not willing. They're willing to just rather run their company with mistakes. Why? Because they leave it up to memory. And this is what I'm trying to point out here. You can't leave it up to memory. 100 steps when you're selling 10, 20 vehicles per week or month. It's not sufficient to leave it up to memory. Oh, did we get the signature over there? Did we get the finance? Did the finance go through? What's the APR? Did he send his license? These are typical questions. This Trello board seeked to minimize all the question, took all the guessing, all the guesswork out, and it put everything in front of the eyes. Now, initially, if you're not used to project management and Trello, this board might look like a mess to you. But for the person who learned it, which was me, the person sitting behind it, I knew the answers to any question just by the click of 2 buttons. I created checklists for every step. New vehicle checklist. Receive condition report, create stock number. It doesn't matter how small or seemingly insignificant the task was. The fact that it was a task, to me, meant that it had to be on a checklist. New vehicle checklist, so the vehicle goes through all of this stuff. New vehicle arrival, so the vehicle arrives on the lot. It has to go through all of those stuff. And then once it's on the lot, we would move the card from incoming to on the lot. Now, even though we're not trying to solve this per se, now we know exactly which vehicles are on the lot. And then once it's on the lot and it's in a deal, we move to further checklists. So you're literally just going down the pipeline, task after task after task. All deals, that means that any deal that happens, all of these steps have to take place. All deals paperwork checklist. Every deal had to go through all of this. And if you're dealing with complicated stuff, MV82s and DMV paperwork and all that stuff, you could create, see over here, I linked it to a different Trello card where you could have the user manuals and you could have all of the training to any of these kinds of stuff right within the card. So if you have somebody that you're training and they're not familiar with this, they could easily reference other cards through linking, which I explained earlier in my video. So as you can see, every vehicle went through just an excessive amount of steps. And then there were conditional checklists. New York deal. So what's if this is not a New York deal? Then I would simply delete the checklist. What's the point? The point is that at the end, everything has to be green. When it's filed, everything has to be green. If it's filed and it's not green, meaning every single checklist was written off, then something's missing, then something wasn't done right. That was the brilliance of the setup of this board. It takes the guessing out. It puts everything in black and white. There's a reconciliation process for everything. And needless to say, there's an activity feed. So if you have multiple employees working on a system like this, there's activity, there's reconciliation on their activity. You know who did what at which point if you want to research it. conditional lists, however. So if it wasn't New York plates, I would delete the checklist. And what would end up happening is I would only be left with the checklists that I needed for that specific deal. In transit plate checklist, transmittal checklist, buttoning up the file checklist. Every vehicle, every envelope became alive. It had a piece of real estate in our Trello board. It meant something. It wasn't just a vehicle that's sitting on the lot. It was part of our inventory. And if it was incoming, then we knew exactly what was incoming. And some of the important stuff I used labels for. You see the red label? Waiting for title. Because when you buy a vehicle from an auction or online, you don't have the title right away. So the red meant we were waiting for the title. Sometimes the vehicle shows up before the title shows up. As you can see right here, you have a vehicle right here. The title wasn't here, and over here, and over here. That means how are you going to sell the vehicle if you don't even have the title yet? So we utilized labels for very important stuff. The pink labels you could ignore. The pink labels over here, files uploaded to Google Drive, that's only there because the place that I was working at decided not to use this. He was more old school. He found it easier to just work off of memory and not reconcile. Again, you can't force people to want or have organization. So it has to be up to the owner, the manager, whoever's making these decisions. It has to be up to them whether they want to solve the inner workings or complications of an office. So I had moved everything over to Google Drive for him. He found that easier to work on. The brilliance of having a virtual envelope, I mean, there's so many benefits to it, but think about it. A physical envelope requires physical presence. What's if you're not in the office and somebody has an urgent question? My idea was that the virtual envelope is right here on Trello. You could access it from anywhere. And any paperwork throughout the workflow would get directly scanned in. So we had bought a scanner. So when the title shows up, for example, scan it directly onto my desktop, and I would drag it on. So as this envelope was unfolding on Trello, the envelope, meaning paper-wise, the paperwork was building online. Of course, it was also building in real life, because DMV requires you to have all this physical papers and envelopes and references. But everything was growing virtually as well. So if you had a question about the title and you're sitting in Aruba on vacation, you could go onto Trello, you go into that vehicle's envelope, and you have the title right there. And for those who don't know, you don't have to attach things through clicking on attachments. You could drag and drop. Not only that, you could drag and drop without even having the cart open. You just drag and drop like this. Very important. So all this paperwork, doesn't matter for which company you're trying to organize, you set up a scanner that scans directly to desktop. These quick scanners are $300-400, and I would drag and drop documents straight into the cards. The envelope was alive. The vehicle was incoming, then it was on the lot. Then the salesperson takes it from there and puts it in pending. And if he sells it and it's ready for paperwork, then the salesperson would just have to fill in these 6 questions. And me, the person doing the paperwork, I would know exactly which checklists I need to use based off of those questions. And then we would sell it, get all the paperwork, scan all the paperwork in, and move it over to sold, finished paperwork. And then there was a checklist how to finish the paperwork and button up the file. And then once it moves over to filed and buttoned up, that means the physical envelope was buttoned up and put into a drawer for safekeeping. That was the life cycle of a dealership, the back end of a dealership. Now, if you apply this same kind of organizational logic to any business and any workflow, granted, you might not have what it takes. My point is, there are dynamic ways to use these technologies. Me, for example, I do consulting for a lot of businesses. My name is Nate Mandel from Expect Huge. If you would like for me to help you organize your business, you can find me online, expecthuge.com. I specialize in all things digital. I consult with companies all the time. You may see that your inner workings of your office is a mess. It needs organization, but you might not know how to organize it, but you know that it can be organized. You could hire people who could organize it for you. It doesn't even have to be me. Anyone with this kind of creativity or organizational skills can do the same thing. And believe me, every company needs a different kind of setup on Trello. Some companies have a board for every employee. Some companies have a bunch of employees on one board. It all depends what you're trying to solve and how you're trying to solve it. So every company gets essentially their custom workflow. But when it's set up correctly, the amount of money that you save and headache that you save is insurmountable. And then there's 100% reconciliation. When my file was over here all buttoned up, all in green, there was no ifs or buts. When my boss used to ask me, did that happen? I said, I don't know. I have to check Trello, just like you would have to. I can't keep track of 50 vehicles, 100 tasks per vehicle. That's insane. It's not even realistic. It's old school. It's archaic. Being in the tech arena, being in technology, you learn that there's more modern ways to try to solve things, and you're looking at it. If you have any specific questions, let me know. I could create a video tutorial on it. If you need help organizing your business, a virtual consultant, or if you're in the tri-state New York area, it could be in-person consultant. Let me know. Thank you for watching. I hope this video was informative.